All right, so now we're kind of shifting gears, and we're going to bring in a special guest, a really, really high IQ guy, and he's going to hate me for saying that, but it's true. And this is the kind of guy that makes your program better. And he's a sports information director, and that just means he knows everything about every sport that there is to know. And his name is Nick Robinson, and he is actually the sports information director for John Brown University. And there you can see him. And I had to break a few arms and pull a lot of teeth to get Nick to be on this program because he's in such high demand. But there he is, and we're going to now dogpile on what we call the top 25 in NAIA basketball. And it's not that we're going to talk about who's in the top 25 specifically. Before we do that, we just need to know, how do we get to a top 25? So first of all, welcome, Sir Nick. Thank you for being on Buzzer Beater and taking a little bit of time out of your very busy schedule. Just tell the crowd, what's up? Just give us we want to hear your voice.
John, it's a pleasure to be with you today. That introduction was way too generous to my liking.
Not even close.
But I'm happy. I'm happy to be invited to talk about NAIA hoops with you, and hopefully we can talk about some things that make some of these processes that maybe initially appear maybe behind closed doors or maybe behind kind of a cloud of mystery, bring that to the folks, and so they can have a working knowledge of how this works as we get into really the core part of our basketball seasons this year.
Yeah, I agree. And it can be a little confusing well, first of all, it's the NAIA. So there's a lot of NCAA rules that are in general just apply. And then there's little nuance rules and the way we go about things here in the NAIA that just aren't known. And that's why we bring on experts like you to clear things up. So first, the top 25 is in men's. Let's talk about it. There is a men's and women's top 25. Are those exactly the same? The way they go?
That's right. Well, in the way that they work, they're the same, but in the way that they're used, it's actually different. So the men's side of things are actually piloting a program that's beginning this year. And what they're doing is they're basically divorcing the selections for the national tournament from the top 25. And so if folks head over to naia.org on their leisurely time to check out the polls that are posted there, you'll notice that the men are actually referred to as a top 25 poll, but the women are referred to as a top 25 rating. And that nuance in terminology is intentional because a poll is publicly only. So that is to say, hey, these are a group of coaches selections for that edition of the top 25. While the women's top 25 is produced the same way, the usage of that information is actually much more important, at least for this year. And that's going to include using that as a metric for a primary or secondary form of information that the National Selection Committee uses to choose all of the at-large teams for the 64-team field for the national tournament.
All right. So if I heard that right, there are it's hard not to say the poll, but the men's are a poll.
Yeah, but
right?
The women's is the rating.
And then the women's is the rating. So on the poll, and I did notice this when we looked up the way we get what's actually on the poll itself. It says not, I don't know the exact wording, but something like not used for seating or something like that, right? So is this just something they do for fun?
Well, for the men's side of things, I think you could make the argument that yes, that's pretty accurate, because historically the top 25 has been a major metric in the national since we've gone to a national selection committee. That has been a major metric in every sport in the NAIA. But like I said, the men are piloting, and actually women's lacrosse is the other sport that's piloting this program. That's kind of divorcing that poll slash rating from what is to be considered for those at large berths for the national tournament. And while it is a good metric, I think we have a lot of tools available to the coaches that are and the committee members that are on the national selection committee that maybe make it a little bit redundant.
Okay, so you said a lot there. I think there's a few things to unpack. Um, so before we get too attached to numbers on a poll, walk me through, if you know, I think you probably do better than I. Walk me through how a selection committee is like. What is a selection committee? How does that work? Where do these votes come from?
Well, I think first what we need to talk about before we get kind of to that national level is bring it down just a little bit,
Okay.
because the NAIA uses what are called area ranking committees. Those are affectionately known as ARCs, and those are 6 regions of the country divided up so that each of the ARCs contains either 3 or 4 conferences within those ARCs, so within the different regions. And then that is then used as a primary or secondary criteria when the National Selection Committee chooses the at-large berths. But just basically, the ARC is there's 6 of them. There's the North Central, the Midwest, the West, the Great Lakes slash South, the Southwest, and the Southeast.
Whoa.
And so those contain either 3 or 4 conferences. And so 5 times a year, these 6 committees get together. Each conference is represented with that, along with one kind of at-large independent person, and they rate the teams that are in their arc, and then push that up to the national level. So that the folks who are on the National Selection Committee have this season-long conversation, so that we can see there are ebbs and flows to the season for each of these programs out there. But there's 5 rankings per year, and if you have 4 conferences in your arc, you submit 16 teams to the national level, and then if you have 3 teams in your arc, you submit 12 that go upwards. And then those are used as primary and secondary criteria when choosing at-large berths. But then that kind of leads us into the National Selection Committee. And the
Okay.
reason why I had to talk about the ARC prior to that is because each ARC chair has a voice in the room or a vote when it comes to the National Selection Committee. So essentially, each of the geographical regions and therefore all of the conferences have a voice at the national level. So each of the ARC chairs are on that National Selection Committee. And then there's a couple at-large folks that are on there as well. And those can vary between former coaches, former administrators, sports information directors. The men have chosen a selection from the NABC, which is the National Association of Basketball Coaches, to be on that committee. So there's a group of 11 or 13, depending on how that's structured per sport, and they're the ones that make those final selections because each conference has at-large berths. Now, if your conference is fewer than 10, you get 1 at-large, or I should say at least 6. Okay, and then if you're over 10, you get 2 at-large berths. So once you have all of those at-large berths determined, and that is based on whatever the conference chooses, so that can be a regular season tournament, or a regular season champion, a tournament champion, a regular season runner-up, a tournament runner-up. The conferences get the autonomy to choose those. Okay, and then once those automatics are put into the field of 64, then the National Selection Committee has the responsibility of choosing the rest of the field. And that is where all of these different components come into when making those selections. Now, remember, we used to be two divisions in basketball. We've recently gone to one division. So fielding a 64 team field is a much more daunting task than perhaps a 32. Whereas you could argue some teams might get left out that feel like they should really get in with a 32 team field. A 64 team field eliminates that. But once you start going down the ladder, so to speak, it can become very muddy on which teams deserve to be in those last 15, 20, 25 slots. But that's where all of these primary and secondary criteria come in to help that committee make those decisions.
Wow. Wow, that's a lot to kind of remember, if especially if you're new. I'm not new, and Nick, you've enlightened me quite a bit. I have so many questions about that. I know we can't get to all of them today, but
Would you like to talk about the RPI real quick? Because that's a really important metric as
yeah,
well.
it is. There was something interesting you said about the conferences. The conferences are left the autonomy to choose how the automatic
They're automatic
bids
first.
work, right? So I've only heard of your season champ and your tournament champs, or if they are the same, then it's the runner-up of the tournament. That's the only way I've ever heard it done. So is there possibly a different way, or is that just universally the way all conferences work?
Right. So the conference does have the autonomy. And if you're talking about basketball, I'm pretty sure that's how it works in most of the conferences, if not all. But there are conferences that have gotten so large that they feel that the runner up of the regular season is a better body of work
Wow.
than how a team did in 1 week in late February.
Hmm.
So there are instances of regular season runners up being that when the tournament and regular season champion are the same, then the second one, there are some conferences that choose their regular season runner up. And that's just by virtue of having some of these large conferences like the Heart of America.
Yeah. Um, wow. And there's 21. So most, I, I don't know that we'll find out factually, but most conferences have more than 10 in them. So they're going to get two automatic bids at least. That
The
is some,
NAIA publishes a qualification plan each summer for all of the sports, and that's available on naia.org. And you can check out all 21 conferences with all the teams that are in them.
awesome. Yeah. And we'll try to include some of these links in below, I guess is how we would say it. But all right, you mentioned RPI. That's exciting to me because I'm an analytic. I like computers. I like numbers. I like to geek out on that kind of stuff. And so are you? I think you're about to tell me that the NAI has some kind of RPI, which is
They do. They
crazy.
do. And this is where I'm going to plug sports information directors just briefly.
All right, do
Um,
it.
but the statistical record keeping and reporting, because it's no good if you keep it, but if you don't report it, then
Okay, fair. Yeah.
if the tree fell, did anyone notice? This is huge because you could make the argument that the top 25 rating poll and the ARC, those can be considered, in layman's terms, maybe the eye test in terms of what are people seeing from these teams. But the RPI gives us an opportunity to take into consideration what are the numbers telling us. Okay. And the RPI has a couple of weighted items in that final number that is produced for each team in the NAIA. And that includes things like strength of schedule, the win percentage, and then what's called net efficiency. And that net efficiency is just the difference between your offensive efficiency and your defensive efficiency. And inside of those is essentially how efficient you are at both of those, and then the relationship between the two. So those kind of numbers really start showing some of the granular data on teams that maybe have a really high offense, but they're giving up a ton of points a year. Or teams that maybe don't score a lot, but they've got an incredible defense, so they're getting these victories. So those numbers give the National Selection Committee the opportunity to dig into those numbers a little bit deeper. And those numbers that are produced for the RPI are primary and secondary criterias that are used by the National Selection Committee. So that's where the record keeping and the record reporting are vital. Ironically, you think, oh, this is just taking stats at a basketball game.
Yeah.
This could play a role on if your team is that the last four in or the first four out.
Yeah. And not enough praise or even acknowledgement. I think I've been around athletics all my life, collegiate athletics now for quite a while. Not enough acknowledgement goes to the SIDs at any level. They are the backbone of how athletics work. I mean, obviously, it takes the players and then the coaches, the athletic directors to lead the organization. But inside of all that, there's this engine. And I always make a philosophical argument that not that many people would be big fans and follow sports if it wasn't for statistics. And statistics are just a part, just one of the spokes in the wheel of things that you do, Nick. I know that, and I've been around, but it is a major component, and you got to get them right. It's really built on getting it right, and we can't even really talk about polls or ratings or rankings or anything like that if you don't have a system that gets the numbers right from the games, and that's a big part. So I'd like to, stand up, applaud all of you guys. In my opinion, I haven't met most SIDs. I just know a few, but you guys work really, really long hours and very hard. I want to say thank you, at least on the behalf of the Champion Sports Network, for all you do. It's amazing. And you, Nick, are amazing at what you do. There's so many things I love to pick your brain about, and you help me understand more and more, especially about NAIA culture and how it works. One final question. I know you've got a limited time here, but the women and men's you had mentioned early on are a little bit different. Is it the same process, or are they going to work pretty quickly to get men and women to the same equator here on how they get to rankings, pollings, whatever we want to call it? Ultimately, it goes into seedings and how the tournament is constructed. Are they going to get close together pretty soon?
It's hard to tell, to be honest with you. Again, this is a pilot program that the men are doing. It very well could have easily been men's soccer and women's lacrosse, and we wouldn't be having this discussion. Why are the men and women different?
Yeah.
So it's really hard to tell. I think we'll have some proof in the pudding, so to speak, once we get a field of 64 selected come March. But I think what the NAIA is attempting to do is remove perhaps some of the politicking that perhaps occurs at every level in a national poll, right? And perhaps making it more so that the voices and the teams that need to be discussed start at the ground level in the area ratings committees and work their way up that way. And then once they make it to the national level, you then have all of these supporting figures and documentation. So it could be something that some other sports, even the women perhaps, maybe jump on next year because they said, hey, this was a huge success for the men. This could be something that this is a one-year anomaly. So it is really hard to tell right now at this point.
So no RPI in the women, or is RPI being
There is.
explored everywhere in all sports?
Yes. So the RPI is used in select sports. It is very important in sports like basketball and soccer. Okay, and the committees, the National Selection Committee has the NAIA. This is hoop specifically, broken down into 4 quadrants. And you've got your first quadrant, which is your top 50, your second quadrant, which is 51 through 100. You got your third quadrant, which is 101 through 150. And then the fourth quadrant is 151 through, there's approximately 216 teams being fielded this year in the NAIA. Wins, losses, margin of victory, all those things against quadrant 1 teams, and that's based on the RPI, right? That is a huge benefit to teams when being discussed at the National Selection Committee. That is a primary criteria. If things get really in the weeds and it's really hard to differentiate between a couple teams as you're getting towards the bottom of the tournament, quadrant 2 will then be used as a secondary criteria. So that's including kind of what a team has done across the top 100 teams. And that's essentially the top half of the NAIA.
Yeah.
So that's a large bit of information, but sometimes in order to ensure that we do our best to get the best teams in the field of 64, sometimes you have to go that deep.
Yeah. Well, and that is such great information. Thanks for taking the time, Nick, to help break that down for us. That was awesome. I'm going to have to, I'm sure, rewatch this just to be able to make some notes. And you should publish a white paper or something on this and make it easy. Because there's quite a bit to digest, especially when you think women's and men's. Right now, at least this year, are slightly different in how we view it, how the seedings come out. But that's going to be a big part of what we do here at Buzzer Beater, is especially as we get close to the end of February and predicting. That's a lot of fun to predict who's going to show up. And the usual suspects will be there, but I think it's that 50 through 14 or maybe 40 through 14 who there's going to be a lot of bubble teams and how we get there. And so I've kind of created this little index called the Champion Sports Performance Index. It's not quite like the RPI. We don't really take strength of schedule into it, but it's not supposed to show up as a ranking type of system, top to bottom, but more along the lines when you look at it. These two teams are playing. What is their CPI number will kind of predict who's going to win. And I'm not saying we're using to bet anything on it or anything. There's no betting in NAIA, but
it's always fun to prognosticate.
Or maybe a dinner. And
that's right.
Anyway, you come to us. Siloam Springs. I'm assuming you're in Siloam Springs right now. It's kind of the end of the semester up there at JBU, right?
Yes, that's correct. We've got a couple of men's hoops exhibition matches coming up here. We've got a D2 next Monday, and then the following day we'll be playing at Division I Oral Roberts over in Tulsa. So those are always fun.
Yeah.
And earlier this season, the men actually played Baylor and had a very strong showing, very impressive. Especially the men here. Obviously, the women are doing very well. They're 5-0 for the second time ever in program history at the top of the league standings. And the men are just able to schedule some of these exhibition games that are just really fantastic when you get to play some D1 schools. That's just a lot of fun for everybody.
Yeah, I'm going to keep my eye on that. You guys have a good team, men's team and women's team. So this is going to be a lot of fun during this season. We are definitely going to follow John Brown University in all they do. A little shout out to your big man, Gabani, or is it Jabani? I'm not.
No, you got it, Lucas Gabani. Yep.
Gabani, yeah, man. That guy, he's special, and he's going to be a handful. He's going to be hard to stop. So, Sooner Athletic Conference, John Brown University. It's a treat if you guys out there can check them out. They've got some really good basketball going on this year. I know it's early, and you want to probably knock on some wood, Nick, when you hear other people talking good about your program, but they're a lot of fun to watch. I've called 2 games already, and both were extremely fun to watch. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us and break down how the top 25 works.